Good morning and very welcome to this seminar from the Swedish Royal Academy of Engineering Sciences. It's the Entrepreneurship Academy and Research to Business who want to bid you a very hearty welcome. My name is Carola Lemne. I'm the chairman of one of the thematic advisory groups within EVA, and we are dealing with the future of Swedish enterprise. And both these two projects, the Swedish Entrepreneurship Academy and the Research to Business, are part of what we are running and we hope will be very helpful. When I was thinking about the theme of today, X and garage units, is that a blessing or a blight? I was thinking a bit about a scenario work we have been doing. We have been trying to think, what type of society are we moving into? And I'm sure you're quite familiar with these type of scenario works. And of course, one question when you're doing this is, will we go back to growth? Or do we have to look for a society which will actually stagnate or at least have much lower growth than we've been used to the last couple of years? And the other is, of course, are we going to go back or continue to be a more open society? Or will we have more, if you would call them nationalistic, closed, protective societies? And one combination of those two questions would be that, yes, we do go back to growth, but we will also have more of protectionism, more of closed societies, more of nationalism. We call that the tiger scenario, and it's not necessarily a very nice world. In that world, you believe a lot in win-lose. You don't really think that win-win, make America great again, just to take one example. You work very hard, but you work for your own territory, your family, your company, your country, perhaps not for the common good or, for instance, a European Union. The leaders tend to be alpha males, rather authoritarian, rather undemocratic. I'm sure you can all think of examples right now. And making your territory better, like the US, or larger, like China, is high up on the political agenda. If that scenario becomes true, what does that mean for companies and enterprises in a world of that type? Well, for one thing, the fight for competences will be just as hard or even harder than today. It will be even more important to be the best, to have extras in your offer, because it will be more difficult to get through a more protective environment. You have to be able to show that you're helping customers immediately, not in the future, but now. You might have competition about globally, about metals, about hardware, but of course also about competences. And just selling stuff might not be enough. You have to really show that you're adding something. Now, what does that mean then for a future enterprise? Well, I think it all boils down to one thing. We have to be even better at finding competences, the best competences, and letting them be innovative and being able to bring innovation to the customers, to the society, to create a benefit. I think Swedish companies can do this, but we cannot afford not to let our best intelligence, our best competence lose. And I think when it comes to garage units, whether they are a blessing or a blight, my take is that we simply cannot afford to quench good ideas when we find them, but we have also to find a way of turning those good ideas into a benefit for companies and for society. So I, for one, am looking forward to this seminar very much. And with these words, I will give over to the next speaker. Welcome.
Thank you, Carola. And good morning, everyone. My name is Monica Wassén, and I have the honor to moderate this seminar this morning. And as Carola mentioned, we will be talking about new venture units and the role they play when it comes to boosting innovation and growth within established companies. Many large companies today have created separate units, so-called garage or X divisions, with a focus on business development and generating new ideas. But do they work? Are they a blessing or a blight? That's what we're going to talk about this morning. And with us today, we have Ivo Sander. He is a professor in entrepreneurship from Uppsala University. And together with his colleagues, he has run a research project on this topic. He's going to share his findings with us within a few minutes. And we also have a panel here today with the guests from Ericsson, from Telia, and from Mobility X Labs. So warm welcome to you too. We will meet the panel later on in the show. But before we get started, some practicalities. If you have questions to our guests during the seminar, we will be using Mentimeter. So please enter menti.com and sign in with the code. I think you see it in the screen right now. It's 8117078. 8117078. And we'll do our best to catch and answer as many of your questions as possible during the panel discussion. So let's get started. Warm welcome, Ivo Sander. You have the clicker there for your slides.
Thank you so much, and good morning, everyone. So you're pre-warned. I'm going to start with presenting you or presenting the results from a study we've done. And I'll be very brief on this. I think it has some interesting findings and then implications maybe for how we should see these new venture units. So I see us, and I'm talking about my colleagues, Gundela Lycke and Michel Bazou. We are a catalyst. We start the discussion here. And I think we have some intriguing findings, actually, that at least need to be thought about. So I'm going to stick to being the boring academic and simply tell you what we found in our presentation with a little bit of an introduction, though, to the topic we're dealing with. So, by the way, the presentation you can have afterwards, we secured that, so if you don't catch all the details, you can always ask for the presentation. You can see this. So, before we get going, these NVUs and the study we've done, just to place it in context, and what I put up here is sort of a figure about renewal generally in corporations. And what it actually shows you, there are multiple ways of renewing organizations. You know, this necessary renewal that you need to bring about. You could do it externally. You can bring in ideas from the outside, and recruitment of competencies is one way to do this. Now, in the pyramid, and that's where I'm going to be in my presentation, that's internally within the corporation, because new things can evolve and emerge there as well. So the question is, where do we take care of these new things that come internally? So externally, internally, there's a bigger picture here, but I won't be talking about this. I sense we're going to get into that with the panel, because there are different shades to this story. But again, I'll be talking about new venture units, and that's the orange dot here. So what they are, essentially, they're there to create novelty, to capture novelty that emerges, and then develop it for the corporation. And I'll give you a little bit of a description. They have many names, they come in different shades and so on, but I'll give you a general picture of what they are to start us off. So what are these new venture units, if you ask me? Well, three things. They're semi-autonomous, and that's very important, actually. They're not supposed to be part of what we call the mainstream organization. That makes them structurally separate. There is sort of a little bit of a boundary here that is you create around these units. They are not the mainstream, and that's the important part. And in most cases, although that's not necessarily true, they're also expected to create really new things. It's an area where you can go and test out things that may not be what you usually do within the corporation. So novelty is sort of a higher degree of novelty is expected from the things that go on in these new venture units. So this is what they are, generally speaking. And this is the process we're thinking about here. Separation then in the NVO, that's where it starts. That's where you develop these early ideas and really the early stages. You need to take them through this. And that's a special art, if you so wish. And that's a separation. But the ultimate goal is always reintegration, at least the way they're typically conceived of, they need to get back into the corporation. That's not true. I told you there's a different spin-off story in corporate new venture capital, but that's, I won't talk more about this. They're supposed to be reintegrated within the mainstream organization. So these things should be happening with these NVUs. And the reintegration is perhaps often the most challenging part for anything that is connected to these units. So overall purpose, whoever is running these, and we have representatives of these NVUs or is in there, first thing is to find these new things, attract them, get them into the NVU. Then develop this, take it through the early stages, make things work, proof of concept and all of these things. And once it's ready, it should be the start of a new business for the corporation. And that's really the final part of this. They are there for the corporation. So this is sort of the reason why we have the NVUs. So, blessing or blight. Researchers have looked at these, over the past decades, and they come to the conclusion, well, they have some good sides, and they have maybe some not so good sides in terms of making them work for the greater corporation. So the blessings first. Why do you have these things? Well, first of all, this is really a unit or an area or a thought world where you can go, where you can meet likes. People who can live with uncertainty, live with early stage, testing, prototyping. They know what it is all about. So you get into the right environment and sort of mental mode to develop new things early on. And this is what they represent and what they offer you. Then, nourishing is part of this. You have specialty resources. Maybe you have a makerspace, but this is a place where you go get resources, the ones you need, without having to ask. And this is a large part of it. You need to be protected from the mainstream, and that's perhaps more sinister. The mainstream has its way of working, processes, assessment criteria. Early stage ventures, they need to be a bit protected from this. And also protected from corporate rivalry. That's also part of the picture. So these three things are a blessing for anybody who ends up in these NVUs. Perils are actually the other side of this. It's just, if you have one thing, you can't have the other. And one of the perils is then, well, maybe you become too adventurous. I said you're supposed to be different in these units. You do things that are not typical for the corporation. Well, maybe you get too playful, to put it that way. And if you're too playful, maybe you do some very, very high-risk projects that are not going to work. So that's a peril, and you need to find that balance, of course. And then, of course, if you have your own resources, it means you should not or could not draw on the corporate resources. But, of course, these are good to have, whatever, market channels or R&D findings or anything. So by being structurally separate, you get your own resources, but it sort of pulls you away from what the corporation could offer and actually help you with when you develop these new ventures. And of course, this separation also means that once you need to be reintegrated, well, people are going to be sometimes quite surprised to find, oh, you have this. And you're not prepared. You have no relationship to whatever comes out from these things. And you heard about not invented here. That typically happens too in this transition phase. And then, of course, there is a rivalry also internally. Very often, maybe not in all companies, but in many companies, if you have a bunch of guys who can play around and have fun, that's going to create envy. And you start asking, okay, where's the output? What do you get out from this? And that creates all kinds of problems, maybe for the survival of the entire NVU. So you can see benefits and then perhaps drawbacks from these, and they are structurally built into this. This is nothing you can escape from. It simply is. You simply need to live with it, and we'll have the panel discuss how you live with it and how you make this work. So, very briefly, our research, and this is not going to be a research seminar, and I'm going to present the results very simply to you. What have we done here? We simply wanted to know, listen, if there are good things and bad things to the things that go into an NVU, can we say anything about, or do they actually deliver on what they should be delivering? And surprisingly enough, nobody had really looked into this. Do they actually promote novelty within corporations? Or is it maybe the other way around? So that is the thing we wanted to look at here in our study. Put very simply, do new ventures that are placed in these NVUs, new venture units, do they fare better or worse than ideas that are developed and placed in the mainstream organization? So that is what we actually looked at. And I'd skip all the technical details and come to the main finding, and perhaps most interesting finding for today. Again, what we have done here, we have 86 internal new ventures, and we talked to the champions of these ventures. You know, what were these ventures? How were they related to a corporation? What did they do? When did they do things? So we have them pretty much figured out. And we have a number here that sort of were developed, placed in the mainstream, and the others were then placed in NVUs. There's quite a mixed bag there, but these specialty units for promoting novelty. So we have a group of NVU ventures and a control group, if you so wish. And the question is, are they different? And what we wanted to see is there any difference in terms of survival? Simple question we ask, are new ventures that are placed in NVUs, are they surviving longer or shorter within the corporation? So we measure this as time to termination. Put simply, is it a good thing for the survival of the venture to be in these units or not? And you can see the details here. And simply the main result we found in this study is this. And it is what the results tell us is being placed in a new venture unit as a new venture, it doubles your risk of termination. So you could put it very simply, if you're placed in an NVU or if you seek out an NVU for your venture, that could be the kiss of death, more than actually helping you in the corporation. A researcher would never say that, but put simply, this is what we're seeing. And the difference is big enough to cause for some reflection. So what's going on? So we try to figure out what's going on, because this is surprising. It's not supposed to be this way. So we compared, were these ventures different? Were they less embedded? Were they less related to the parent? No. Were they more adventurous, or were they more high risk than the ones in the mainstream? No. So it couldn't be an issue of not really fitting in. Then we looked at, did they threaten other business units, products or services more than the ones in the mainstream? No. So threat wasn't the issue either. And we looked at the champions of these, you know, were they less engaged in developing new ventures and NVUs? No, it was the same. So it can't be the explanation. So what is it then? If it's not this, what makes these ventures from NVUs die off earlier? And we have two explanations, and we have plenty of more with the panel. This is what we think could be going on, and we need to be careful. Two things really. The first thing is, okay, they die off earlier. And the interpretation is that's perfect. That's exactly what NVUs should be doing. They should test early, fail early. This is the way to do entrepreneurship. So they're delivering exactly what they're supposed to do and what the mainstream typically cannot do, because they're not professional in doing entrepreneurial things. That's one way of seeing this, so no problem, that could explain it. Now, the other explanation that is really what we perhaps believe in more for a number of reasons, this is a cultural clash. So what happens while we're seeing this is that you have a culture in the NVUs, a language, way of working, and the tools of the trade, which separate you, make you different from what you typically do in the mainstream organization. So all these things create a cultural barrier. And you can picture sort of somebody from an NVU, from one of these ventures, coming to the mainstream and they're sort of presenting, here we are, this is what we do. And then, you know, we have a minimum viable product and all of these things. And the guys in the mainstream, they say, oh, hold on, I can't read you. What are you guys doing? And the guys from the NVU says, we got to speed up things here, we're going to test early. And the other guys say, well, no, this takes time. We need to research and investigate. So this is then the culture clash that happens once these two sides meet. And I think this is probably where we sort of come to this is our reading of what we're seeing here. You have these different worlds, and remember, this is created so structurally. You cannot change things here. But once you do it, you have a cultural issue. You have the culture within the NVUs that makes things work in a separate way. You could say it's a different tribe. And you have the mainstream, which works differently. And when they clash, it leads to this reaction. Listen, guys, we don't know what you guys are doing. And this is a real quote. We can't understand you. And of course, then the easiest way, if you can't understand, better close down, better terminate. So the point is, it could be either of these two. This is what we think is going on in particular. Okay, so let's go to the panel, and we can maybe come back to some of these issues later on. What are the implications? From my perspective, first one is recognition. Just recognize that these things are going on. You have different worlds here, and you need to make it work somehow. And it can be made work, better or worse. That's for sure. But recognition is the first. If I would come, with any implications for anybody from the NVUs or anybody in the mainstream, it would be something like this. For the people living in these NVUs and the new ventures, you simply have to recognize that you are a different tribe, if you so wish. So you get immersed in this language, you get to know how to do these things, and you forget that the mainstream doesn't work quite that way. So once you realize this and stop thinking that everybody is like me in the NVU, I think you work more smoothly or strategically when you meet the mainstream organization. Mainstream organization is the opposite. Learn from these guys. They know how to run early things. They know entrepreneurship. Accept it, learn from it, and maybe bring it into the mainstream organization more than you have before. And the final point is, and this is again broaden the scope, how do you deal with this? There's one way of making this work, and I think it's top management support. Top management support over longer periods is really important here. And perhaps the simplest way of getting things working still for these NVUs is to have incentive systems, especially among middle managers. If you're expected to bring up novelty every now and then, you will not simply say, this is an NVU thing, this is nothing for me. Rather the opposite, you will seek them out. You will want them to become part of your mainstream business. So top management support is a very important issue here, and incentive systems, and lots of other things to make this work. So there we are. Would you ask me, should we have NVUs? Well, take the result here as a catalyst. This is what we see. I would always have them, as Carla was saying. Always. You need this in your portfolio if you want to renew yourself. And they have other advantages too beyond actually adding new businesses, but that's maybe for the panel to discuss. So, a lot of things in a short period of time. Thank you for listening, and I'll simply leave it now for the panel.
Thank you very much, Ivo. That was very interesting. We have a question from the audience, from Magnus, who's asking, can you see any examples of NVUs being change agents when it comes to driving cultural change in the larger organization?
It's a very good question. And Yves Michel Bassou, one of the co-authors of this study, has now finished her dissertation on pretty much this topic.
So call her is your
sorry.
So call her. That's what.
Yes, exactly. So get in contact with Eve. But yes, they have and I think that's part of why we see a resurge of these X units and garage units. Partly, it is because there's a feeling there's something here we need to learn. We need to be more agile. We need to be better at doing this within the mainstream organization. I think these units are then a learning place, and the idea is to take that learning and bring it into the mainstream organization. And that could be a big benefit to the corporation beyond just adding new businesses as well. So there is something to that. Yes, absolutely.
Excellent. I think they want to change your mic while I introduce the panel. So if you go to the technicians over there, I will take the opportunity to introduce our guests in the panel. And so welcome. Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. We have Brendan Ives, and you're head of Division X at Telia. That's right. We have Erik Ekudden, good morning, CTO at Ericsson. And we also hello. And we also have Katarina Brud, CEO of Mobility X Lab. Are you with us?
Yes, hello
hi,
everyone.
Hi, Katarina. I would like to start with a question for you, Eric. I know that Ericsson invests in several new venture units or accelerators and other platforms. How important would you say these units are in order to boost innovation and growth within large established companies like Ericsson?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think the whole subject is really important for Ericsson, and I would say for the industry and perhaps Sweden as well. So I really welcome this discussion. I think we can all learn from each other and most likely improve, because this is critically important. And the whole topic of intrapreneurship and intrapreneurs, and I think Ivo was into that several times, is of course key to Ericsson. And being a leader in a global technology business, there are a number of tools that we have to use to stay at the forefront, to really be the technology leader and be first with products and solutions. And doing that requires an intrapreneurship culture, I would say, across the whole company. So from that point of view, as you pointed out, Monica, it's about a few tools. We have something called Ericsson One in Ericsson, which is really a process and a way of working with new growth opportunities and new innovations. That came after having worked with Ericsson Garages for some time. And I can talk more about the learnings in Ericsson One. But that is not the only tool. In fact, we have a lot in the mainstream as well when it comes to driving new technology and new businesses, new business models, because we are in a very rapidly changing technology landscape. And that is, for example, in the AI space, we have an AI accelerator built up to really help build and create new businesses. We have an Ericsson Ventures arm where we make our own strategic investments in startups outside the company, similar to the structure that Ivo went into. But all of this really comes down to the ability to renew the portfolio and build for the future when it comes to both the mainstream as well as new growth bets. And just on the Ericsson One process and what we're doing there, some of the learnings are very much in line with what Ivo mentioned, which is, of course, you need to have the right team and the right ideas, but it is very much about top management commitment and having almost like an iteration between the venture unit, the new activities with Ericsson One and the business that it should land in. We have good examples of building new business in the IoT space. We have good examples of building it in advertisement and building smart manufacturing connectivity, things which were not before. But at the same time, I would say that one of our recent changes that comes from intra 5G in itself, because that is really a new technology, a new ecosystem. Much of it is actually created out of strong entrepreneurship.
Do you see these units playing a role in the cultural change that we were talking about before? Like, can you see that the mindset and the culture is moving into the mainstream organization?
I do, but that's again why I'd like to look at it more as a broader set of activities, because if you have a very strong technology leadership and innovation culture across the company, great ideas come from all places, and you need a way to really be able to capture that and build for the new and make the investment at the right time. About 3 years ago, we invested 25% more. We increased our R&D with 25%, and that is a reason why we could come out with new innovation in the 5G space. So I think culture is a much broader topic than you can assign it to one unit, but it's absolutely clear that Ericsson One and what we do in other accelerators, it helps us with internal culture change. It helps us also with talent attraction. It helps us with also external dialogue. So it is a very important tool.
Let me turn to you, Brendan. You've been heading Telia's Division X for the past 4 years. What are your thoughts when you hear Ivo say that belonging to an NVU doubles the risk of termination?
Yeah, I might have thought it was 3 or 4-fold risk, actually. So maybe it gives me a breath of new confidence. No, look, I think what I've seen in my experience, I think there's a couple of issues that we sort of see at play that create that risk, and I think one is what you could call innovation theatre. And I think, when we set up what is now Division X, looking back, perhaps that was a bit the issue. We were sort of trying to centralize the innovation agenda. And as Eric is picking up, I think innovation has to happen across the entire company. I think an X unit or a garage, whatever you want to call it, needs to be there to solve specific problems. So rather than sort of generating ideas or looking like we're innovative, what are the actual problems that we're trying to solve, and then building up around that? I think the other huge issue is around the independence, and maybe the real issue I think that we've been sort of trying to crack is, if reintegration is kind of seen as a given, you're almost the surrogate for the new ideas, and then you've got the ultimate receiver sitting there wanting to be very involved from day one, so you're kind of slowing up or restricting that possibility to actually get things out. So I think what we've tried to actually be really focused on is being a little bit more open-minded to the exit. So more starting from what's the problems we're trying to solve, where do we believe Telia needs to be in the longer term, put the unit in charge of trying to develop and get those new ideas going, but then be a little bit more open-minded to how they may be reintegrated, potentially sold off. Hopefully we actually also pinpoint or find along the way things that can become a net new line of business for the company. Easier said than done, but I think that reintegration issue is really, really important one to think about, and I think we've got a lot that we can share between corporates as well. I mean, as said to you, Ivo, in the break, one of the things that I sort of picked up reading this research and a lot of other research is it would be interesting to understand how many corporates have read that research in the beginning, seen the common failures and said we can be different and we'll do it differently. And I think the more we can share and try and get that playbook right, I think there's a way to crack it. But yes, I would agree. Being separate for many reasons brings risk with it.
And how would you say that you boost success and survival? What have you learned over the years?
I think having top-down support is critical. If you're a part of where the CEO, where the board believe the problems are to solve in the longer term, I think that's important. One must remember, however, that the life of a CEO is probably typically shorter than what it takes a startup to get to scale. So how do you sort of bridge that divide between changes in the leadership? I think the independence is super important, but I use the catchphrase, at least internally, on being independent but well connected. I think if you're sort of hidden away, a stealth unit, it's going to be super tricky if there is a reintegration coming. I think not only that, but you are then going to come out of nowhere with a surprise. So enough independence. In a way, try and give the internal startups the same room to breathe as an external startup would have. Because I think that would probably be almost my key takeaway, is that if you're trying to drive an internal startup, you're actually not only trying to fight and win on the market, you're trying to fight and win internally. So how do we build that environment that takes away that internal challenge and lets the unit focus on actually competing with the real competitors who are coming at our business.
Not the inside.
Not inside,
No.
right.
As I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions to our guests, we're using Mentimeter. So go to menti.com and you use the code 8117078 to sign in. So please do. Katarina, you're
Yes.
representing a somewhat different new venture units. You're a collaboration platform founded by 6 global partners, Ericsson being one of them. Can you tell us briefly how you work?
Yes, thank you. So we act as the interface between startups and our corporate partners to accelerate global innovation. And I think it's a very interesting aspect we have, having 6 industry partners working together in a new way and inviting startups from all over the world to find new innovations and solutions around future mobility. So we were founded in fall 2017 and has built this up together with the partners since then. And I think we're set up in a fairly unique way as well. As you mentioned, we have 6 corporate partners: Sevt, Ericsson, Volvo Cars, Volvo Group, Veoneer, and Zenuity, who's now changing names. And we're hosted by Lindholmen Science Park. So we're a neutral platform and can be a neutral facilitation place for these partners and also for our startups. So we have a small Mobility X Lab team, but at the same time, we're deeply integrated with our corporate partners. So we have a board, a management team, a marketing and communication team set up from representatives from our partners. And also with the collaboration products that we do together with startups, it's people from the partner organizations, the industry, that are doing that. And Mobility X Lab provides the facilitation and the structured way of working together with the startups. And I think it has been very good to have us as the neutral platform, accelerating and learning together, doing things in a new way together, and also that we as Mobility X can also at the same time be the voice of the startup. So, yes.
And you've been up and running then for about 3 years. Can you see any results in terms of boosting innovation and growth so far?
Yes, definitely. And I think what I hear people talk about here, it's definitely a cultural change that needs to happen, and inspiring that back through the main organizations and having that deep connection is key for us. We have had 40 startups since we started, and we started from scratch. So we're soon turning 3. And we have startups from all around the world, 40 startups. We have had 48 collaborations together with our industry partners, and we've had the first 2 years we had 8 accelerations, and that's a commercial contract or more together with the partners. So that's what we're aiming for here, to create that value and integration with our corporate partners. So that's a main value, but I also see so much happening. And as I mentioned, we gather around the same table, these 6 corporate partners, and we learn so much. We can ask questions and say, so how do we work with purchasing? Because that's a challenge for corporate partners, and then one partner from around the table can share that we work with innovative purchasing. This is how we do it, and we can inspire the others to kind of change and learn from each other. And I think that's a huge benefit that we've seen as well. So both, I mean, the startups results we've seen, and also the industry partners learning from each other. And how do we do this in a new way? And what can we learn from each other? So it's quick wins to sit around the same table and discuss these things.
Thank you. Do we have any questions from the audience, Johan?
Yes, we have one. Thank you. Yeah, we have one question that asked, are there any examples of methods to use NVUs to pull large corporation into new areas in different ways? Have they used this as a method in some sense?
Who feels targeted with that question? Do you see it in your research in any way, Ivo, or?
Well, let me just give it a start. I think that there is the best way to do this is to be patient. And I think this is the most important thing. We have to remember, if they really do what they're supposed to do, these NVUs, they should take on high-risk projects. And it takes, first of all, there are going to be many mortalities in there. And second part, it's going to take time. If you really do something cutting edge, 10 years is nothing. So if we want to make this work, I'd say the first thing, patience, and as we said, top management support, that's everything. Unfortunately, but that's a different issue. Many of these NVUs disappear. Changes of CEOs, poor economic conditions, and then they go. That's death by NVU. So that would be my response. This is tricky. It can be worked out, but patience. Brandon.
Yeah, I mean, I think picking up on that, I would very much say we've got a lot we can learn from venture capital, how they run a portfolio of companies and try and do it in the same way. Allow those internal startups to work, live, breathe, survive in the same way that an external startup would survive. But I think picking up a little bit on what Katarina was talking about as well, I think the more we can share, the better, because there isn't a playbook out there, but every time I talk to a peer that has a similar role, there are things that we can pick up and learn from each other. So combination of venture and sharing within corporates, I think a lot of problems can be solved, or at least, let's say, a lot of problems can be avoided by learning from each other's earlier mistakes.
Ivo mentioned earlier that cultural differences as a main challenge when integrating ideas from these innovation units into the ordinary or mainstream organization. I'll turn to you, Eric. You talk about that you have an innovative culture in the entire company, but do you see that people and the culture in these accelerators or Ericsson One, are they different and very different from the rest of the mainstream organization?
Well, I think there are differences in different phases. If you come with an idea, and again, Ericsson One is about, in a way, mimicking the VC process with Dragon's Den, funding in increments, working with an MVP, iterating and all that. Of course, not everyone would like to work in that way. So you see a special culture that comes out of Ericsson One and how to drive things to a new business. And I think that is, of course, inspiring the rest of the company in many ways. But I think that, as I said before, these are different times. You see these big jumps or big opportunities across the whole portfolio. In Ericsson One, we have a process so that this is continuously happening. We have a big funnel of ideas and sort of internal startups. This is more of a process in terms of actually getting enough out of it and learning faster. But again, the innovative culture or the innovation culture across the whole company, it really helps to be able to take bolder bets, making investments into new, despite having perhaps a portfolio that would be cannibalized at some stage, despite having some uncertainty. And I think that helps both for the unit, the NVU itself, Ericsson One, and it helps for the rest of the company to bring in new things. So yeah, it's an extra accelerator, but it's also very much connected to the rest of the company's way of working with new products and solutions.
What do you say, Brandon? In Division X and the rest of the Telia, are the people different and the culture, or are they similar?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably a hard one to sort of put in a box. I think there'll be people issues, there'll be process issues, and you probably just have to tackle each thing on its own merits. I think one of the things that I've found very visible is almost the paradox that the things that have made us so strong and survived in our core business in the past, scalable, really having that sort of scalable efficiency, about building those sort of barriers to threats and change, are exactly what is working against the new things, which is all about speed and agility and failure. And I think that's the tricky thing to get through. I come back to my comment on reintegration before. I think maybe it's tied a bit to what you said on patience as well, Ivo. If there's this mentality of everything's going to be reintegrated, and especially when you're trying to do it too early, I think that's sort of really accelerating the cultural clash. If we could give things a bit more time to live and breathe, maybe it's going to become a little bit easier. And I think Eric touched on IoT at Ericsson. I think at Telia, IoT would also be probably the one I would focus on. We built that business to a point now that we've created great pull. Then you've got a lot of smaller things that I think, if we went and tried to get those into our core channels today, it would just be an absolute disaster. So treat everything on its own merits. But people tend to jump on board success. So I think that's what we're sort of looking for as well, is, even though it might be small successes, how do we deliver proof points that show we're on the journey we said we'd be on, and get those early adopters on board internally as well. Same as a startup, right? A startup trying to do a partnership with a big corporate, it's not easy to get in. And I think we've got to recognize that those same challenges are probably there internally, if not even more so internally.
Add to what Brendan said there, Monica. I think that kind of knowing when the timing is right to really scale something up, that comes back to the business strategy of the company, of course, top management support. But when the timing is right and you have that right team, success breeds success. So you will get other people, great people, talent, wanting to tag along. And then you have, so there is a high risk that you're not perfect in timing or that you don't have everything lined up in terms of the business. And I mean, we have to accept that there is cultural clashes and high failure rates. But when it happens, that's really when you can start to see the acceleration of having these units, because they are able to take decisions faster, to be able to really scale up and get things done in a different way. So it's not about everything will be a success because you have them. It's really about having that sort of awareness of the timing and getting the right team on board.
Ivo, I know that you've done a lot of research on entrepreneurship. And what kind of culture, according to the research, would you say is needed in order to breed entrepreneurs within an established company?
I think, if you talk generally about entrepreneurship, now we're talking, all kinds of renewal activities going on. One of the things that also we find in other research of ours is to have an ambitious culture. And put very simply, it is a culture where everybody is forward-looking and wants to move ahead. And there are different, aspects to that. But if you have that culture, which really is about development and going forward, that is positive for entrepreneurship generally. And I think as an opposing possibility to have an embracing culture, which has different connotations, we find quite on the contrary has a negative effect on entrepreneurship, which is quite astonishing. Because embracing means sharing knowledge and all of these things. We're still playing around with this curious finding. But again, short answer to your question, develop this ambitious culture. If everybody wants to move forward, I think you gain so much, and it will show up somewhere in the renewal activities in the corporation. So that would be my first thing to say.
Do you others have anything to add on that, or do you agree with their findings?
Yeah, I mean, I would just maybe add, I think it's if this, again, the CEO and the board, if they're able to paint a future picture of where they think the company needs to go, and you can then link the activities that you're doing in the innovation areas or in the new venture units to that, it's going to be much easier for people to see what you're up to. If people are looking at it and they're thinking, what are all these crazy ideas they're spending time, money, effort on, and there's no linkage to the North Star of the company, I think you're setting it up for failure. So I try and put a lot of effort into actually really making sure that if our group strategy is not showing the things that I'm being asked to work on, we either address the group strategy or we address the things that I'm working on. And get that bridge right, I think it helps.
You need the connection.
You need the connection.
Yeah. We've heard that culture is essential for innovation. I'm a bit curious on the fact that we have COVID-19 right now and that people are working from home. How is that affecting innovation within these units where people are used to meeting? Katarina, do you want to start?
So, of course, I think the whole world has been affected by the pandemic and what happened. But what I think is interesting to see how we've grown from the start, as I mentioned, then of course, we have a strength of meeting, and especially at the great automotive connectivity cluster we have here at Lindholmen in Gothenburg, where all these businesses are close together. So we usually meet. And initially, we started working with Swedish startups, but pretty soon we said we want to interact with the best startups in the world. So that already made us be digital and set up meetings and collaboration platforms to meet online, and that hasn't been a challenge. So of course we're moving more and more online, but we already started that journey from only working with Swedish startups to international startups. So that's not I don't see it as a challenge. And also working with this great people I do from our industry partners and also the startups, they're entrepreneurs. We love to solve problems, right? So I don't see it as an issue. There's always a way, right? And it's about finding that way and thinking about what is it that we're looking to achieve here and how can we do that. And hybrid events are, this is an excellent example of having a hybrid event. Some of you are meeting and some are online. So,
what would you say, Eric? How has COVID-19 affected the innovation culture within Ericsson?
Well, initially surprisingly little, because things actually work well. What we've seen is that use of these kind of tools and being digital, of course, we all like to be in a mixed mode at least, or maybe even more physical. But it is, since it is the way that we work now, is a new normal. We see that most of the things continue as they did before the pandemic, 80% working from home around the world. But if I look at it a little bit more mid and long term, I think it has clear risks, because you need to meet, I think Katarina put it well, these clusters, these ways of getting to whiteboard sessions and really working with things that come out of a completely new idea that was not part of the project, all of those things I would be more worried about for the mid and long term. So I think we certainly need to be better at using the digital tools, working more in this mixed mode, and then, of course, getting back to working in physical meetings as well. But it has spurred innovation, and I think that's the interesting thing. We're accelerating the need for this digital infrastructure. We have a lot of experimentation hackathons to help out in the COVID situation around the world. And of course, great people, brilliant people, they use also a pandemic like this as a way to come with new things. And that we've seen in the medical field. We've seen it in just one example, this, I mentioned the mobile advertisement business that came out of Ericsson One. That found a new application in terms of actually tracing where you needed ventilators and ICU beds and things like that. So all kinds of new ideas, of course, are also coming out of the situation we are in.
Same question to you then, Brandon. Do you see that it has affected Telia and Division X in terms of innovation?
I think it actually put us to the test a little bit. I think picking up again on what Eric was just touching on, to actually pivot some of our businesses as well. I mean, if I look at our data insights business, for example, it was heavily focused on retail. The customers disappeared, or at least turned the communications off overnight. We then put our effort into sort of pivoting to see how we could be helping the health authorities, which we've been doing across the region. So I think it was actually in a lot of ways a good test of, do we have that speed and agility that we're gearing up for. Coming back after the summer, however, I would say one of the things that's very, very evident is it puts pressure on leadership to do things I think that leadership needs to be doing anyway, but that is really sort of setting that, what's the North Star, how do we make sure that we have a mission and that we're aligned around the problems we're trying to solve. If that's not there, it's extremely difficult if you're not in that sort of daily contact. So I think if there's one positive I really take out of it, it's actually forcing leadership to be better at getting the entire organization behind the mission and giving them the clarity.
We're running out of time, but maybe you have some more questions from the audience, Johan.
It's come a lot of questions lately. In fact, a bit late, but we try to manage some of them anyway. I think we have some entrepreneurs out there listening, really. One question is, in the project where cooperation between the NVUs and, for say, production in the mainstream organization is needed, how can this cooperation be managed in different ways? Do you have an example there? How do you do in Telia, for example?
A little bit again comes back to the top management and strategic alignment. I think if it's very clear that this is something that's supported from the top, that we need to put effort into solving it, it's going to be easier. Another thing though that what we try and do is to actually make sure that we've got, if it's something that requires a lot of internal effort, that the sponsor is actually coming from our core business. So we're actually doing something that's beneficial for them and not trying to force something on them. If it's something we're ultimately going to want to force on them, we probably need to be a bit more self-contained, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Any more comments on that question?
But I think it was touched upon already, the transparency and the collaboration between units developing new things and core business, that's critical. And you can do that in so many ways, but not being too secretive about the new ventures in the NVU it's a key part of it.
Okay.
So, do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I hope so.
One last question.
This is an entrepreneur. How can a regular employee get an idea into the NVU? Or is it all closed in the NVU already?
Start with you, Brendan.
Yeah, I mean, again, we try and start very much from problems versus ideas, and then, I mean, I think as most of us are sort of saying, if we have that transparency on, you know, here's the domains or the battlegrounds, whatever you want to call them, that we're working on, then it's going to be quite easy for people to approach that domain lead or the, you know, whoever's running that initiative. If it's totally new ideas, we try and have a system for capturing it. But I think a lot of the, you know, the important thing is that we're giving feedback. Are we picking it up? Are we shelving it? And it doesn't go into a black hole. But we're pretty focused on here's the areas we're putting effort at the moment, and new ideas that don't fit, maybe we just don't have the time and effort to put into them.
Katarina, how do you do within Mobility X Lab?
Yeah, so we're all for collaboration, and we don't work with a single industry partner's own ideas. I think they have their own structure to do that. But if they would like to take that idea and collaborate with either another startup or another partner, that's when they can come to us, and we can discuss that jointly and see who we can connect them to. So that's how we work. We're all for collaboration, and I think that's the most interesting part. And we see that with startups joining us at Mobility X Lab. They're not only working with one partner, they're working with several, and sometimes we can even see startups collaborating with each other. And that's what I think is unique with our setup.
So, you want to add something, Eric?
I think that having an open process to come with ideas and having support for vetting and then guiding the idea into something that could be a business, that is important. And that's what we have in these examples that I talked about. But I also think that one of the trickiest things for any corporation is really how to get to that new business. So working in an open environment, even with, as Katarina mentioned, with other startups, with a broad range of the ecosystem, that's actually one of the key criteria to judge whether it is a good idea that can be turned into a business, or whether it's more of a technical improvement or something that needs to get other kind of support. Because creating a new business is even if you have the right timing and the right technology, it's very much about having that business leadership. So working with a broader ecosystem in Sweden as well as in California, we have these kind of open co-creation labs with partners. D15 is something that we are promoting in US, for example. Those are the ways to get involved. So if you are coming with ideas, I think you also need to think about, does it fit into the business context? Does it add something with partners, rather than looking at it more as an idea box and how to take the idea forward alone? It needs to fit in that broader context.
Yeah. Thank you. Time's running up, so I'd like to thank you very much for all your valuable insights this morning, and thank you to the audience for tuning in. And I'd like to hand over to you, Johan.
Thank you so much,
Johan
Monica.
Karlstedt, and you're the project manager within IVA,
yes,
and the initiator of the Swedish Entrepreneurship Academy.
Oh,
and
thank you. Yes, that's true.
And I'll give you the final words.
Thank you, and thank you, Monica Wassén, for guiding us through this webinar in an excellent way. And thank you, Carla Lemne, for the introduction of this webinar. Eric, Brendan, Catherine, for good work in the panel. And of course, Ivo Sander, together with Gundula and Eva Michel, for the research. When we talked about and worked with innovation, we started early at Eva in 2009, in fact. It was we said that innovation in the world, cooperation is the word. So we will continue with this seminar series in different ways to just gather people together, researchers, business leaders, entrepreneurs, and so forth, and learn from each other, even in Corona times. So thank you all for participating in this webinar. We get back to you very soon and talk about entrepreneurship, research, and so on. Thank you very much for participating this day. Bye. Take care.